The wind howled through Coal Creek, a constant reminder of the harshness of life in this forgotten corner of the West. Dust devils danced down the main street, swirling around the worn wooden buildings that clung precariously to the hillside. Coal Creek was a town built on hope and fueled by coal, a place where dreams often turned to dust. Amidst this rugged landscape stood a small, unassuming schoolhouse. Inside, Miss Beatrice clutched a piece of chalk, her gaze fixed on the eager faces of her students. She was a beacon of civility in a town where rough edges were the norm. Miss Beatrice, with her spectacles perched on her nose and her hair neatly pulled back, seemed an unlikely figure to tame the wild hearts of Coal Creek's children, but she did so with a quiet strength and unwavering belief in the power of knowledge. She taught them grammar, yes, but also kindness, respect, and the importance of standing up for what was right. Little did her students know, Miss Beatrice would soon be putting those lessons to the ultimate test, trading her chalk for dynamite in a desperate attempt to save her brother from a fate he didn't deserve. A fate designed by men that only craved more money and more control over a town that was already on its knees. The school bell, a rusty old thing, clanged, signaling the end of the school day. Children poured out of the schoolhouse, their laughter echoing through the dusty streets. Miss Beatrice watched them go, a warm smile gracing her lips. She knew each of them by name, knew their strengths and their weaknesses. She pushed them to be their best, both in their studies and in their character. Among her students, she was respected, even loved. They knew she was strict, but fair. She wouldn't tolerate backtalking or laziness, but she was always ready with a helping hand or a kind word. She saw potential in each of them, even the rowdiest of boys. They brought her apples and other trinkets that they found in the mines or out in the fields. It was late that evening, the quiet broken by a sudden, harsh banging on her door. Sheriff Clem, a hulking figure with a face like weathered leather, stood on her porch. His eyes were hard, and his voice was even harder. "Miss Beatrice," he said, his words blunt, "I need you to come with me. Your brother, Thomas, has been arrested." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous, shattering the peace of the evening and turning Miss Beatrice's world upside down. "Arrested? What for?" Miss Beatrice asked, her voice trembling slightly. Sheriff Clem's gaze didn't soften. "Stealing from Mr. Harding," he stated plainly. "The mine owner." Miss Beatrice felt a surge of disbelief, then anger. Thomas? Stealing? It was absurd. Thomas was the most honest, hard-working man she knew. He wouldn't steal a crumb, let alone from the mine owner. There must be some mistake, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. Thomas would never do such a thing. Clem shrugged, his eyes cold. "The evidence says otherwise, Miss Beatrice. He was found near the storage shed with a sack of, or that didn't belong to him. Harding himself identified it." Miss Beatrice knew in her heart that Thomas was being framed. Harding, a ruthless man known for his greed and his disregard for the miners' well-being, had something to do with this. Thomas had recently been vocal about the dangerous working conditions in the mine, and Harding wouldn't take kindly to that kind of dissent. This was Harding's way of silencing him. But she had to prove it. She had to get Thomas out. The next morning, Miss Beatrice marched straight to the sheriff's office. She tried to reason with Clem, presenting him with Thomas's spotless record and the obvious motive Harding had for framing him. She pleaded with him to investigate further, to consider the possibility that Harding was lying. But Clem remained unmoved, his face a mask of indifference. "My hands are tied, Miss Beatrice," he said, his voice flat. "Mr. Harding is a respected man in this town. I can't just accuse him of lying without proof." Miss Beatrice saw then that the law in Coal Creek was not blind. It saw perfectly well, and it sided with those who held the purse strings. Harding had bought and paid for the sheriff's loyalty. There would be no justice for Thomas through legal means. The realization hit her hard. She was on her own. If she wanted to save her brother, she would have to do it herself, even if it meant breaking the law she had always upheld. The chalk was about to be set aside. The time for dynamite had come. That night, Miss Beatrice couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing, grappling with the enormity of what she was contemplating. A jailbreak? It was madness. She was a schoolteacher, not a criminal. Yet, the thought of Thomas languishing in jail, a victim of Harding's greed, spurred her on. Memories of her father, a gruff but loving miner, flooded her mind. He had often told stories of his days working in the mines, tales of daring feats and close calls. He spoke of dynamite with a mixture of respect and caution, explaining how it could be used to move mountains, or in the wrong hands, to destroy everything. She remembered his lessons on how to handle it safely, lessons she had dismissed as mere stories at the time. Now, those stories seemed like a lifeline. The decision was made. It was a dangerous path, one she never imagined herself taking, but she would do anything for her brother. She would learn to use dynamite, and she would break him out of jail. She was determined to teach Harding and Clem a lesson of their own. Miss Beatrice was done playing by their corrupt rules. The next day at school, Miss Beatrice looked at her students with new eyes. She needed help, but who could she trust? She decided to confide in Sarah, a bright, resourceful girl who always aced her arithmetic, and Billy, a strong, dependable boy with a knack for fixing things. After class, she asked them to stay behind. "Sarah, Billy," she began, her voice low, "I need your help. My brother is in trouble, and I believe he's been wrongly accused." She explained the situation, carefully choosing her words, emphasizing the injustice of it all. She watched their faces, gauging their reactions. To her relief, they were both eager to help. "We know Thomas is a good man, Miss Beatrice," Sarah said, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll do anything we can." Billy nodded in agreement. "Just tell us what you need." Emboldened by their support, Miss Beatrice approached a few of the older miners, men who had worked alongside Thomas and knew his character. They, too, were sympathetic and willing to lend a hand. A small but loyal team was forming, united by their belief in Thomas's innocence and their desire to see justice prevail. They were ready to risk everything for Thomas and Miss Beatrice. With her allies gathered, Miss Beatrice began to formulate a plan. She spent hours studying the town, observing the sheriff's routines, and memorizing the layout of the jail. She knew every back alley, every hidden path, every detail that could give them an advantage. Back in the schoolhouse, grammar lessons took on a new meaning. Sentences about nouns and verbs became coded messages. "The strong noun will act on the weak verb at 8 o'clock, she would say, knowing Sarah and Billy would understand that meant the miners would create a distraction near the saloon at 8 that evening. Prepositions became locations, adverbs became actions, and punctuation marks became signals. The students, initially confused, soon caught on, their grammar lessons transforming into a secret language. Miss Beatrice, the quiet schoolteacher, was orchestrating a daring jailbreak right under the sheriff's nose, using the very tool she used to educate the children of Coal Creek. The absurdity of it all was not lost on her, but it was working. The plan was taking shape, word by careful word. They were almost ready. Friday night arrived, bringing with it the weekly town dance. The saloon was packed, the air thick with music, laughter, and the scent of whiskey. Sheriff Clem, never one to miss a good time, was right in the thick of it, his attention far from the jailhouse. This was her chance. As the fiddler played a lively tune, a group of miners, following Miss Beatrice's instructions, started a stage brawl near the saloon's entrance. It was a chaotic scene, shouting, shoving, and overturned tables, exactly the kind of distraction they needed. Under the cover of darkness and the din of the brawl, Miss Beatrice, Sarah, and Billy stealthily made their way towards the jail. Miss Beatrice clutched a small bag containing the dynamite and the tools they would need. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve remained firm. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back now. They were one step closer to freeing Thomas. Every footstep was careful, but purposeful. They were almost there. Reaching the jail, Miss Beatrice carefully placed a small amount of dynamite near a weakened section of the back wall. With trembling hands, she lit the fuse and quickly retreated with Sarah and Billy. A moment later, a muffled explosion rocked the jail, creating a hole just large enough to cause a distraction, but not enough to cause any serious damage. The guards, startled by the blast, rushed to investigate, leaving the front entrance momentarily unguarded. That was Miss Beatrice's chance. With surprising boldness, she strode towards the front door, her head held high. "I need to see my brother," she declared, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "There's been a terrible accident at the saloon, and I need to tell him." The remaining guard, a young, inexperienced deputy, hesitated. "I don't know, ma'am," he stammered. The sheriff said, "No visitors." Miss Beatrice fixed him with a stern gaze, the same look she used to silence unruly students. "Are you going to deny a woman the chance to see her brother in a time of crisis?" she challenged, her voice laced with indignation. "Think of your own family." The deputy, flustered and unsure, relented. "All right, ma'am," he said, fumbling with the keys. "But just for a minute." The deputy unlocked Thomas's cell, and Miss Beatrice rushed inside. "Thomas, we're getting you out of here," she whispered urgently, quickly explaining the plan. Thomas, surprised but relieved, didn't hesitate. With Sarah and Billy keeping watch, Miss Beatrice and Thomas slipped out of the jail and into the darkness. They met up with the other miners, who had horses waiting for them. As they rode out of town, they could hear the commotion erupting behind them. The sheriff, realizing he had been tricked, was furious. The jailbreak had been successful, but their escape was far from over. The sheriff and his men were hot on their trail, their horses pounding through the night. Miss Beatrice knew they had to reach the mountains before they were caught. She glanced back at her brother, his face grim but determined. They were free for now, but the fight for their freedom had just begun. The bounty hunters would not be far behind. They had to move, and move fast. The desert stretched before them, a vast and unforgiving landscape of sand, rock, and scrub. The moon cast long, eerie shadows, making every bush and boulder seem like a potential threat. Miss Beatrice, despite her fear, rode with a steely determination, guiding her horse through the treacherous terrain. Behind them, the sheriff's posse relentlessly pursued them, their shouts echoing across the desolate plains. Miss Beatrice knew they couldn't outrun them forever. They needed to find a place to hide, a place where they could regroup and plan their next move. She remembered her father's stories of hidden canyons and abandoned mines, places where miners sought refuge from the harsh elements and the even harsher realities of their lives. Perhaps one of those places could offer them sanctuary. She scanned the horizon, searching for any sign, any clue that could lead them to safety. Every minute counted. The sun would be up soon, and the desert heat would make their escape even more difficult. The race against time was on. They had to survive, they had to prove Thomas's innocence, and they had to expose Harding's corruption. As they rode, Sarah, ever resourceful, pointed out a discarded saddlebag lying near a rocky outcrop. "Someone must have dropped it," she said. Miss Beatrice, cautious but curious, dismounted and examined the bag. Inside, she found a ledger filled with meticulous records of Harding's dealings. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes widened in disbelief. The ledger contained evidence of Harding's illegal activities, skimming profits from a mine, bribing officials, and even orchestrating accidents to collect insurance money. And then, she found it, a detailed plan to frame Thomas for stealing or complete with names and dates. "This is it," Miss Beatrice exclaimed, her voice filled with triumph. "This proves Harding was behind it all." The ledger was the key to exposing Harding's corruption and clearing Thomas's name, but also made them even more of a target. Harding would stop at nothing to keep his secrets hidden. They had to protect the ledger, and they had to get it back to Coal Creek. The race against time had just become a race against even greater danger. The chase would not stop until either she and her brother were captured, or Harding was put away. It was now or never. Knowing they couldn't outrun the posse forever, Miss Beatrice led her group to an abandoned mine she remembered from her father's stories. The mine was a labyrinth of dark tunnels and unstable shafts, a perfect place to set a trap. Using her knowledge of the terrain and her father's lessons about dynamite, Miss Beatrice rigged the mine with a series of clever traps. She created tripwires that would trigger small rock slides, and she strategically placed dynamite charges to block off key passages. When the sheriff and his men finally arrived, They charged into the mine, confident of capturing their prey. But they quickly realized they had walked into a trap. The mine came alive with explosions and falling rocks, disorienting the posse and scattering their forces. Miss Beatrice, armed with a rifle and a surprising amount of courage, moved through the mine like a ghost, picking off the deputies one by one. She used her knowledge of the tunnels to her advantage, appearing and disappearing like a phantom. The sheriff, realizing he was outmatched, grew increasingly desperate. The final showdown was about to begin. A teacher would prove to these men that brains are sometimes better than brawn. After disarming the last of the deputies, Miss Beatrice, Thomas, Sarah, Billy, and the miners rode back to Coal Creek. They arrived in the town square, weary but triumphant. Miss Beatrice gathered the townspeople, her voice hoarse but determined. "I have proof," she declared, holding up the ledger, "that Mr. Harding has been stealing from you, bribing officials, and framing innocent people, including my brother Thomas." She read aloud from the ledger, detailing Harding's crimes. The townspeople listened in stunned silence, their faces growing angrier with each revelation. They had suspected Harding was corrupt, but they had never imagined the extent of his treachery. As Miss Beatrice finished reading, a murmur spread through the crowd, quickly growing into a roar of outrage. The townspeople, finally realizing the truth, turned against Harding, demanding justice. They had been blind, but Miss Beatrice had opened their eyes. The time for corruption and greed was over. The townspeople were ready to take back their home. Miss Beatrice had shown them the way. They would not be silent any longer. They would take their town back. Together, the townspeople, fueled by anger and a newfound sense of justice, marched to Harding's office and demanded his arrest. Sheriff Clam, now seeing the tide had turned, reluctantly agreed to take him into custody. Harding, stripped of his power and influence, was finally brought to justice. With Harding behind bars, Thomas was exonerated. The charges against him were dropped, and he was declared a free man. The town celebrated, rejoicing in the victory over corruption and the triumph of truth. Miss Beatrice, standing beside her brother, felt a sense of profound relief and satisfaction. She had risked everything to save him, and she had succeeded. She had shown the people of Coal Creek that even a seemingly quiet schoolteacher could stand up to injustice and make a difference. But she knew her work was far from over. Coal Creek needed a new start, a new leader, and a new commitment to fairness and equality. The first step was complete, but it was only the beginning. Now they could start to rebuild their lives and their town. They just needed to stick together. Coal Creek had a new sense of hope. Miss Beatrice, hailed as a local hero, decided to stay. She returned to her schoolhouse, but things were different now. She taught grammar with the same passion, but she also taught her students about courage, justice, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. She became a role model for the children of Coal Creek, a symbol of strength and resilience. She always kept a stick of chalk in one hand, ready to teach, but she also kept a watchful eye on the town, ready to defend it from any future threats. Word of her daring exploits spread, and whispers of the dynamite schoolteacher reached far and wide. Some admired her, others feared her. And yes, every now and then a bounty hunter or two would come sniffing around, hoping to collect a reward. But Miss Beatrice was always ready for them, her wit as sharp as a knife, and her knowledge of dynamite even sharper. She protected those around her, and she stood up for what she believed in. Coal Creek was her home, and she would defend it with everything she had. A new chapter had begun, and Miss Beatrice was ready to write it, one grammar lesson and, if necessary, one well-placed explosion at a time.